In southeastern Europe, the Iberian Peninsula is home to over half the butterfly species on the whole continent. Close to 250 species that have colonized all kinds of habitats, from the highest mountains to the coasts, and from deserts to lush forests. Some go unnoticed in their surroundings, whilst others draw attention with their colorful designs. Predators are always on the prowl, with caterpillars as their usual victims. Some feed on toxic plants to prevent others from eating them, while others hide within the plants themselves. After an incredible transformation, these colorful mosaics of scales search for flowers to sip from. These insects have always fascinated us. They're so fragile and so important to their ecosystems. Butterflies. Caves are unique ecosystems where a few animals specialize and evolve over thousands of years, becoming species endemic to each one of these small underground worlds. This centipede, and also this pseudoscorpion, are species that live only in the Cueva del Agua in southeastern Spain. The environmental conditions of caves are very stable, and there are rarely any predators in them. As a result, the animals that live in them are often quite long-lived. In this cave, we also find some insects that look like moths, called caddisflies. They belong to the order Trichoptera, and as that Greek name indicates, their wings are covered with hair. Researchers have discovered that they enter this cave in order to live longer, thanks to the stability of the conditions inside. Caddisflies are quite similar to the ancestors of today's butterflies, which swapped the hairs on their wings for scales, and so led scientists to name their order of insects Lepidoptera, or scale wings. The Cueva del Agua is found close to the Iberian Peninsula's highest mountain range, the Sierra Nevada. Which is home to an emblematic butterfly species, the Parnassius apollo. Its large white wings are covered with scales that endow them with the stiffness necessary to allow them to fly. This butterfly, popularly known as the mountain Apollo, was found throughout all of Asia during the last glacial period. But when the ice withdrew about 10,000 years ago, it was restricted to the highest mountains, which maintained a cold climate. Since then, the isolated populations have evolved in that relatively short period of time into different subspecies, 22 of which are found on the Iberian Peninsula. The one that lives in the Sierra Nevada is the only subspecies with orange eye spots. There are many butterfly species in this national park, and one of the best times to observe them is when they are puddling, as it is called. Butterflies come to the puddles that are formed in spring, above all in forest paths and trails, not so much to drink the water as to sip the dissolved salts from the ground with their proboscis. The most abundant butterflies are the lycaenids, popularly known as gossamer-winged butterflies. This family of small butterflies is the one that includes the most species. The top side of the wings of the males in many lycaenid species are blue, whilst the less numerous females' wings are dun-coloured. Most of the butterflies at this watering spot, or bebedero as the Spaniards call it, belong to the species Plebejus edis. The males need the mineral salts to produce the pheromones that they employ to attract the females. These small blue butterflies aren't the only ones that use pheromones to attract a mate. At the highest altitudes, we find this Erebia species that is endemic to the Sierra Nevada. It is displaying its androconia, which are being stirred by the wind. Androconia are scales modified to become organs that produce pheromones and that look like hairs on both sides of the male's abdomen. When they move, we can see iridescent blues and greens that appear and disappear. These structural colors aren't formed by pigments, but rather by the very structure of the scales, which reflect the light but only emit those colors at certain angles. These short-lived wet habitats teeming with butterflies can sometimes become death traps. Many predators are drawn to this gathering of butterflies, which represent an important food source. The flowers that surround these watering holes are an obligatory stopping point for the butterflies, which need to regain their energy by sipping their nectar. And this perfectly camouflaged spider is waiting patiently for its chance. The mountain Apollos have been flying for several weeks already, and their wings have deteriorated considerably, turning them into easy prey for predators like this European snow vole. The lifespans of adult butterflies tend to be short, and their fragile wings soon show signs of wear and tear, although the veins are the most resilient part. Reproduction is a task that must be carried out as quickly as possible, or it will soon be too late. A new generation of caterpillars will try to complete their life cycle so that the mountain Apollos will take to the air again next summer. But global warming is threatening these relics from the Ice Age, which are confined to higher and higher altitudes in the mountains of Spain and Portugal. Flying insects face constant dangers in the form of traps. Geometric webs created with absolute precision. These oak spiders, which belong to the genus Aculopeira, live in the same habitat as the mountain Apollo butterflies, and our cameras captured behavior that had never been filmed before. These males are facing off in what looks like a medieval tournament between two knights battling each other on a thick thread. The objective is to make the opponent fall off the thread. To achieve that, they wrestle and cut each other's silk threads. The winner's prize is the chance to mate with the females that are watching the battle closely and even approach the very edge of the battlefield, making it quite clear that they are indeed the prize. The peaks of the Sierra Nevada hold many more secrets. One of the most valuable ones is the Puerto del Lobo butterfly, Agriades zulicki, known in English as Zulick's blue, an endemic species that survives in tiny populations at altitudes above 2,500 meters. As with the mountain Apollos and other butterflies typically found at the summits, today the predicted rise in temperatures as a consequence of climate change is the greatest threat to its survival. The lack of water is one of the main consequences of climate change, and here the traditional irrigation ditches created by the people who settled these peaks hundreds and even thousands of years ago play a crucial role. Today, an effort is being made to try to recover these channels of water, and this initiative is especially beneficial for butterflies as they reclaim a very fragile habitat. Mountain ranges are exceptional habitats as regards the diversity of butterfly species. The Cantabrian Range in northern Spain is home not only to emblematic species like brown bears and capercaillies, but also to a fascinating range of butterflies. This small blue butterfly, for example, hides a curious secret. Normally, plant and animal species have a constant and set number of chromosomes, which is what is called their karyotype. Reproduction between two individuals with distinct karyotypes is very rare, and the hybrids tend to be sterile. But there are exceptions. This species of butterfly, called Polyommatus corydon, or the chalk-hill blue, is an extraordinary case in which the number of chromosomes can vary from 84 to 92. And yet when individual chalk-hill blues with different karyotypes mate, they produce offspring that are fertile. When the chromosomes of the egg and the spermatozoid pair up, they exclude any chromosome that does not have a corresponding pair. The butterflies lose its genetic information, but with no apparent consequences for their descendants, possibly because many vital genes are repeated on different chromosomes. Lepidopteran's genitals fit together like a key in a lock, and in fact, one of their functions is to differentiate between very similar species. These sophisticated pieces consist of chitin, the same material that covers the exoskeleton of every insect. Sometimes they fit together in such a way that it's hard for them to pull apart again when it's time to go their separate ways. In the Cantabrian mountain range, there is also a subspecies of Parnassus apollo called Asturiensis, which has red eye spots. Most of the butterflies that inhabit these mountains depend on the plants that grow in the meadows. These alpine meadows, which produce natural pasture, sustain more herbivores, not just butterflies. Traditionally, grazing use didn't cause any damage. To the contrary, it allowed these species of butterflies and the rest of the great natural diversity of the alpine meadows to flourish. But today, some species have become very rare, as is the case of the Phengaris nocithus, or dusky large blue butterfly, which feeds on the burnet, a plant with striking reddish flower heads that is found only in certain meadows with puddles used for grazing. The preservation of this rare butterfly depends on maintaining traditional, moderate, and sustainable animal husbandry. This butterfly has survived both the impact of humans and the threats of predators. For example, these spiders spinning their webs among the burnets. It's popularly known in Spain as the hormiguero oscura, or dark ant butterfly, because of its relationship with ants during its caterpillar stage. This behavior is shared by many other members of the Lycaenidae family, or gossamer winged butterflies. In Doñana National Park, in southern Spain, the morning dew reveals the silky traps that the spiders use to catch butterflies. But there's a truce until sunrise. Birds and mammals are active, but butterflies have to wait for the warming rays of sunlight in order to start feeding again in the fields of Almeria. Without the dew, the spiderwebs become invisible again and fulfill their mission as traps. In this case, the victim of this spider, a member of the Neoscona subfusca species, is a gossamer-winged butterfly typical of mountainous areas called Plebejus argus, or the silver-studded blue. But what is it doing down here at sea level? Scientists were intrigued by this paradox because it's also the national park's most abundant butterfly. The plant it feeds on here has nothing to do with the ones that it eats in the rest of Europe. In Doñana, the caterpillars of this butterfly feed on the rock rose, a plentiful shrub whose pale leaves gave the name to the Monte Blanco scrubland ecosystem. But in order for there to be caterpillars, first the butterflies have to mate, and this just happens to be mating season. The elaborate courtship ritual can be seen in slow motion. Plebejus are also myrmecophiles. That is, they have a close relationship with ants. In fact, the explanation for the presence of this butterfly here lies in the high level of the water table, which allows its associated ant species, the Lasius niger, or black garden ant, to live in this area. Although this ant is normally found in moist soils, it's able to build its nest in this sandy environment at the base of the rock roses, creating the duo that this butterfly needs. To see the silver-studded blues and black garden ants together, we have to wait for night to fall. The caterpillars live inside the anthills and emerge with an escort after sundown to eat the rock rose leaves. The reason that the ants take care of and accompany the caterpillars wherever they go, rather than attacking them, is found on the larvae's backs, where some special organs produce sugars and amino acids that the ants feed on. What's more, the caterpillars have tentacles that they can turn out and that secrete another substance which, in this case, provokes a state of alarm in their insect allies. And so when the caterpillars crawl over the plant, they are always escorted by a cohort of ants on the alert. To see how useful these bodyguards are, all we have to do is take a look at this garden. This cabbage butterfly is laying eggs to start the life cycle anew. After a few days, a new generation of caterpillars emerges. They immediately begin to eat the shell of their own egg, and then they start to devour the cabbage leaves. But this attack won't go unanswered. The plant secretes some volatile compounds that alert its bodyguards to come to the rescue. And there it is. A female Cortesia glomerata immediately begins to inject its eggs inside the caterpillars. Here comes another one. These small wasps, which belong to the braconid family, spend the first phase of their lives inside caterpillars. Their larvae develop there, feeding like an alien on the caterpillar's non-vital parts. They let it live, but they slow its growth and sap its vitality. But the dangers facing the caterpillars of this butterfly, scientifically known as Pieris brassicae, go beyond these little wasps. There are other, much larger predators that hunt them and carry them off. the common wasps of the Polistes genus. Curiously, when they feed on the caterpillars, they're also eating the little wasp parasites hiding inside them. After laying their eggs, the Cotesias wasps drink water from a dewdrop. But thanks to the large number of eggs that the Pieris butterflies laid, there are still a good number of caterpillars munching on the cabbages, despite the heavy losses. When they're a little larger, these caterpillars defend themselves by arching their bodies when the parasitoid wasp touches them with its antennae. All the caterpillars line up on the edge of the leaf, eating voraciously, but the danger doesn't go away, and the wasps continue to attack and cause casualties. The caterpillars defend themselves, however. This one has expelled a dark, sticky liquid from its mouth, soaking the wasp and forcing it to release its prey. With this liquid, the caterpillars put the wasps out of commission temporarily. The wasp tries to clean itself by rubbing against the cabbage leaf so that it can fly again and get out of there, but without its quarry. Only some of the caterpillars manage to successfully become chrysalises. The ones that were parasitized are less fortunate, as the wasp larvae inside them have also finished developing and break out through the cuticle, killing the caterpillar, which will never become a butterfly. Meanwhile, in Doñana, the Plebeius caterpillars are able to complete their cycle under the protection of their ant bodyguards. They finally make their cocoon at the plant's base, always surrounded by their ant allies. After their metamorphosis, they emerge as adults. The mating dance leads to coupling, and so a new life cycle begins around the rock roses. It seems that of this trio, the plant is the only one that is harmed, as it serves as food for the caterpillars that cause it to lose leaves. But once more, research reveals nature's fascinating secrets to us. In Doñana, the summer is so dry and tough on plants that they suffer tremendous stress from the lack of water. It's been observed that the rock rose plants that have anthills and caterpillars, and therefore have been stripped of leaves, suffer less stress and produce a greater quantity of seeds, thus increasing their biological efficiency. So when they feed on the plant, the caterpillars are actually doing it a favor. It's a winning trio, one more example of a complex ecological balance. Many gossamer-winged butterflies associate with ants, such as this Tomaris ballus or cardenillo, although in this case the relationship is much looser. The hind wings of this butterfly are green, which is quite rare. We're in the Sierra Morena in northern Andalusia, and here it lays its eggs on 2 different kinds of leguminous plants, even in neighboring populations. These feed on, and therefore lay their eggs on, this clover of the Medicago family, commonly known as medic. Other nearby populations, however, lay their eggs on Europhaca betica, the Iberian milk vetch. They tend to place them on the flowers or fruit of this plant. Inside this thick, tough pod, there are round seeds. In Spain, this plant is also called the devil's chickpea because it is very toxic, but not for these small caterpillars that burrow into the fruit to feed, thus also hiding themselves from predators and parasitoids. Feeding on toxic plants is a quite common defensive strategy among butterflies, and one of the most effective mechanisms is to store the poison in their own bodies, thus becoming a toxic prey and therefore unpleasant to predators. Birds like bee-eaters that specialize in catching winged insects have to avoid them. To that end, this monarch butterfly displays a striking color combination of orange, black, and white. This flashy coloring sends a clear message: don't eat me because you'll regret it. And the strategy works because not only do bee-eaters avoid them, but the rest of the predators do too. Monarchs are originally from North America, where they are famous for making very long migrations. Curiously, however, near the Strait of Gibraltar, in southern Spain, there are permanent and quite numerous populations of monarchs, and there are references to their living here from as far back as the 19th century. But how did they get here? Scientists are sure that they crossed the Atlantic Ocean on their own, and fairly frequently, reaching the coasts of Europe. But the monarch butterfly could never have settled in southern Andalusia if the plant it feeds on weren't also present here. Asclepias curassivica, or tropical milkweed, was introduced from North America centuries ago as an ornamental plant, and its spreading into the natural environment has allowed the monarch to complete its biological cycle with no trouble at all on the other side of the Atlantic. Another plant which man also introduced and which serves as food for monarch butterflies is Gomphocarpus, another genus of milkweeds. Both plants have spread in coastal areas with certain shared characteristics. Available surface water throughout the year, a lack of freezing temperatures, and disturbed soil, especially by grazing livestock. The monarch can complete its life cycle on both plants. In southern Andalusia, the conservation of this butterfly, which is locally abundant, is beginning to be threatened by the loss of large-scale cattle raising. The drop in cattle grazing is leading to the disappearance of the two plants it feeds on, as the cattle carry out the job of eliminating other competing plants, while leaving the Asclepias and Gomphocarpus untouched because of their toxicity. Another butterfly that arrived to stay on the Iberian Peninsula in the 1990s is this much smaller species, but it hasn't been so well received. Especially not in Córdoba, where each spring the city celebrates the Festival of the Patios, which UNESCO has declared an intangible cultural heritage. One plant in particular is the star of this explosion of colorful plant life, the geranium. But geraniums are precisely the target of this African butterfly, which in only a few years has become the bane of local gardeners. This lycaenid, Europe's only invasive butterfly species, reproduces rapidly, producing several generations a year. It's called Cassoreus marshalli, or the geranium bronze, although its popular name in Spain translates to the geranium drill, because the caterpillar burrows into the plant stalks, which is a form of defense from predators that also makes it more difficult to control infestations. Unfortunately, every day fewer and fewer butterflies are seen in Spain's fields. Many of Iberia's butterfly species are endemic and have small, isolated populations. This biological wealth is endangered. Butterflies are also a beautiful example of biodiversity, an excellent tool to study and evaluate the health of our ecosystems. By making the rounds, observing and taking note of the butterflies, researchers can take nature's pulse and so propose measures to try to alleviate the butterfly's deteriorating situation. Butterflies are also, for example, an excellent indicator to assess the effects of global climate change. Traditional rural land use is biodiversity's best ally. One of the best examples of the traditional use of an ecosystem on the Iberian Peninsula is what's called the dehesa, extensive open woodlands of thinned-out cork oaks or holm oaks with natural or cultivated pasture that supports Iberia's traditional forms of livestock raising, as well as sheltering great biodiversity. This tree-filled rangeland, similar to the savanna, is home to a large number of animals and is also the habitat of a large number of butterflies. One of the best known and loveliest is the Papilio macaon, which is commonly known as the Old World or common yellow swallowtail, because the forked extensions of their hind wings are reminiscent of the tail of that well-known songbird. This butterfly lays its eggs on fennel, an aromatic plant that proliferates on the edges of roads and paths. The compounds in the plant are metabolized by the Papilio caterpillars, which transform them into an acid liquid repellent that they use to defend themselves from predators. When one feels threatened, the caterpillar turns out an organ called an osmeterium, shaped like two wet, flexible little horns with which it strikes the aggressor, impregnating it with the disagreeable liquid. It should be noted that, as is common, the caterpillar had previously warned potential predators of its toxic contents with a combination of bright and striking colors. Safe from attack, the caterpillar completes its development and attaches itself to a twig by its rear end, also encircling its body with a thread of silk called a cincture that holds it in place like a seatbelt during its metamorphosis. Inside the chrysalis, a drastic change takes place, a complex cellular reorganization that will give rise to a completely different organism, a butterfly, which emerges with its wings folded. Pumping hemolymph through the veins in their wings, they gradually unfurl their wings before they dry out. Once they are completely dry and taut, the butterfly can take off and fly through the dehesa in search of nectar to sip and of a mate. Close to the Old World swallowtail, on the edge of the dehesa, there's another butterfly from the Papilionidae that also sports very striking colors in a checkerboard design. It's called the Spanish festoon, scientific name Xerinthia rumina, and its bright coloring indicates that it too has toxic substances in its body. A butterfly's life is hard, and it's essential that it look for defensive strategies. Spanish festoons need thick old-growth scrubland, where it's common to see a very toxic climber called Aristolochia, popularly known as birthwort or pipevine, which the festoon caterpillars feed on. Just like the adults, the caterpillars are also toxic, so they can feed peacefully with no need to hide, safe from the attacks of birds or other predators. After mating, the female looks for ideal shoots of their food plant to lay her eggs on. The Spanish festoon is a bioindicator butterfly that signals when a Mediterranean forest is well preserved. Some butterflies live in very specific habitats. The Paragia egeria, or speckled wood, is very common in gallery forests and loves to sunbathe in the rays of light that thread through the branches. The very similar Paragia schiphioides, or canary speckled wood, is endemic to the Canary Islands, as its name suggests, and we can see it here in the laurel forest on the Anaga Peninsula. The Zizeria knisna, or dark grass blue, is a small butterfly that only a few years ago was very little known on the Iberian Peninsula, but today has spread extensively thanks to the artificial meadows in landscaped areas, an example of a butterfly that has benefited from urbanization. But these cases aren't common, unfortunately. To the contrary, a large number of species are disappearing. One example of this little-known butterfly is called the Etheri fritillary, scientific name Melitea etheriae, from the family Nymphalidae. Only a few years ago, they were found throughout the Andalusian countryside, but today they have become extremely rare. The explanation lies in abusive land use, which has almost completely eliminated the vegetation from boundary land, walls along perimeters and paths, and gullies. Agricultural use is compatible with butterfly preservation, as the insects can find sufficient resources in those small linear habitats. But when even the last traces of natural vegetation are eliminated, the countryside becomes a desert. Erosion gradually swallows up the fertile soil until even the olive trees collapse into enormous erosion gullies. When the vegetation disappears from the gullies, the water sweeps away everything in its path. Today, a large part of the countryside has lost all its butterflies and fallen silent. If we were able to restore to nature those small crumbs of territory, the butterflies would bounce back and brighten up the countryside once again. And with them, the rest of the fauna would return, making our surroundings more livable. In general, butterflies are disappearing from our fields because they are very sensitive to environmental changes. They depend on the host plants they feed on and are very closely linked to them. Plant diversity is directly related to the diversity of herbivorous insects, and one of the most important groups of these is the butterflies. This narrow relationship even allows us to deduce what butterfly fauna used to live in a specific area in the past. All we have to do is extract the pollen left behind in the sediment. In that way, we can reconstruct the flora that lived there at that time in history. When we know the plants that lived in a place, we can infer that the associated butterflies lived in the same location. This is the ancient city of Medina Azahara, located on the outskirts of Córdoba, in the foothills of the Sierra Morena. At the digs there, archaeologists found abundant pollen from the strawberry tree, an autochthonous shrub that was probably already used there as an ornamental plant in the 10th century, not only because of its beauty, but because it produces red berries with a pleasant flavor and medicinal properties. Certain striking caterpillars are linked to this plant, so they were definitely present in this city when it was at the peak of its splendor. Charaxes jasseus is the name of this species, popularly known as the two-tailed pasha, and it eats the leaves of the strawberry tree non-stop. When it completes its development, it looks for some place to attach itself to carry out the process of metamorphosis. In this case, the caterpillar hangs itself up without a silk seatbelt, so it has to anchor itself to the twig firmly and securely. The caterpillar works hard to make a silky fabric before attaching itself and hanging itself up, thanks to a crown of small hooks on its rear called the cremaster. It then sheds its cuticle and gradually begins to display the colors of the butterfly that is forming inside. The adult two-tailed pasha is one of the most spectacular insects on the peninsula. It's also one of the largest diurnal butterflies in Europe. Yet another gem in Iberia's fauna that is endangered. Butterflies are a reflection of the health of our surroundings. In just a few years, we have lost a large part of the butterflies in our fields. If we are able to maintain plant diversity and sustainable land use, we will be able to preserve the butterfly population, and with them, the rest of the ecosystem that we also